Hey, everybody. My name is Damaso Rodriguez. I am a director and artistic director based in Portland, Oregon, and I'm honored to be one of the members of the Encuentro selection committee uh, for the last several months leading up to this great event. Um, Happy to be moderating this panel today, which we are calling Using Theater to Reframe Immigration. And we have right now one of the artists who's presenting, whose work is being presented in the Encuentro, another member of the selection committee, and one of the playwrights closely associated with Latino theater. And we might have another member joining us at some point in the conversation. But I'd love to start out with just everybody introducing themselves and how they're connected to the Encuentro. And a little bit, Jesus, if you can tell us a little bit about your piece, and then we'll get into this conversation. Those folks attending the Encuentro there are other sessions that are all about talking about a particular production, and these panels are really having a conversation about bigger themes and we can reference the work and other work and our work across our careers and elsewhere. So I'll just say, so like I said, I'm a director and artistic director, but relevant to this theme, I think I'll add, I was born in Miami, Florida to Cuban immigrants. In my childhood, I ended up in Dallas, Texas, and then I lived in Chicago, and then I spent a long time in LA, and then now I'm up in the Northwest here. So maybe we can each share our trajectories a little bit as well. I'm going to hand it off to Jesus.
Sure. Thank you so much. My name is Jesús Valles. My pronouns are they, them. I am coming to you currently from Dallas, Texas, but I am living in Providence, Rhode Island, on unceded Narragansett land. My connection to Encuentro this year, it's my first year participating in Encuentro, and it's been really, really exciting. So many of the people that are presenting and that are here and that helped to organize this Encuentro are like North Stars for me as a theater maker and as someone who is sort of emerging into this particular world. So it's an honor to be here and on this panel too with like this like constellation of really wondrous artists. So really grateful. In terms of trajectory and the show that's featuring here. So I come to the Encuentro as a solo artist, pairing with Teatro Audaz to bring my solo show Undocuments to the Encuentro. Undocuments is a solo performance piece, largely dealing with and documenting my coming to the US as an undocumented person, as a child, and the way that the immigration system concurrently allowed me to eventually become a citizen while also creating the infrastructure that allowed my brother to be deported in 2008. And so I think in terms of a trajectory, I came to the United States inside of a truck seat that my father decided to gut so that he could, to quip on the old standard, give me a better life, and found myself here dealing with and thinking about an immigration system that really creates personhood along the lines of complicity and submission. And so, super, super interested to talk with all of the artists here and think about what that means today.
Great. Thank you. I'll hand it over to David, and I should say that, so I'm playing the part of moderator, facilitator today, but David and I are committee members who, this was our panel that we talked about, what our questions were going to be. So, but David's going to play the role of participant as in his role as an artistic director of Academia Theater. So I'll hand it over to you next, David.
Thanks, Damaso. And I didn't know that you had passed through Dallas, Texas. I'd love to hear that story at some point. I'm the executive artistic director at Academia Theater in Dallas, Texas. And I'm on the steering committee, selection committee for the Encuentro. And I've really spent most of the time, working on the panel here with Damaso. And I'm here because Academia Theater has developed new plays about the experience of human beings who have experienced the travails of U.S. immigration policy, and also the stories of that reflect the lives of many of us who are theater makers, as well as our family members, co-workers, and neighbors. And that's really and that has become a major thread of Academia Theater's work, and I would say since specifically 2011. And this has been a journey of humanizing the story of immigrants, but within a complex, chaotic, and often cruel immigration system, but through the virtues of live theater and the possibility for connection and transformation. So Academy of Theater had the privilege of presenting Deferred Action at the Encuentro in 2017. And we were also honored that the Latino Theater Company presented the world premiere virtual run of Ursula, or Let Yourself Go with the Wind, that was written and performed by Academia resident company member Frida Espinosa Müller. And that virtual run took place this last spring. So I'm proud to be here with everyone on this panel to talk about this important subject to me and our community. Thank you.
Thanks, David. I hand it over to Diana next.
Thank you, Damaso. Hola, I'm Diana Burbano. I'm coming to you from Los Angeles, also the Tongva, unceded territory of the Tongva, the Keys, and the Ahashiman people. I am an immigrant. I came to this country from Colombia. We landed in Cleveland. And from Cleveland, where my father was studying, he was a doctor in Colombia, and he came to Cleveland to do some work, to learn some more techniques, but he stayed because my brother was born in Buffalo, New York, and so that ended up being why we decided to stay in America. But my family couldn't take the cold of Buffalo, New York, so we traveled across the country, hitting all the major, as much of the country as we could see, like one of those little cartoons, you know, that you see from Warner Brothers. And we ended up in San Jose. I was raised, basically I say I was raised in San Jose, although I arrived there when I was already, I think, about 10 years old. And I've always, to me, my story has always felt like a ni de aquí ni de allá, because I feel very Colombian, I feel very American, but I'm neither really in the eyes of a lot of people. You know, it's the kind of thing where you go back to Colombia and you get made fun of because you're a gringa, and you are here and then you're not quite fitting in with what's going on here either. So it's something I'm really interested in, and definitely something I write about in my work as a playwright. I am very excited and very proud to be one of the Latino Theater Company's commissioned playwrights this year. I'm currently working for them on a piece about gender and gender non-binary and gender roles, and it's called As Girls Go. It's an adaptation of Amor, Agravio y Mujer by the Spanish Golden Age writer Ana Caro. And yeah, I'm very excited to be here, so thank you for asking me.
Thanks for being here. Thanks, Diana. I'm hand it over now to Yosvany. Hi, Yosvany. I'm Damaso. Good to meet you. And glad to have you here as a representative of the beautiful production We Have Iré, which I believe premieres later in the week for folks. But if you could give us a little bit of your background and tell us a little bit about the production.
Well, my background, I'm from Cuba. Well, first of all, thanks for inviting me to this panel, and especially to talk about a subject that I so dear think of. I'm from Cuba, and I've been here for the past 23 years. And I know that each of us have like different journey in realizing our artistic endeavors. So I came here, like I said, in 1999, though I started coming earlier, since 94. And it was only my pursuit of becoming a contemporary and also a jazz musician too. So even though I started coming through Stanford Jazz Workshop, where they invited me to teach during their summer jazz program, I quickly realized that in order to really study the music and to learn from the horse mouth up, as we say, in as an artist, I needed to live in New York. And then I decided to find my way to New York, and then especially to become part of a larger community a community that was a community of international artists. So it was also for me the opportunity to become part of a larger Latino community in the United States and also in the world, because it's, New York or any city of the United States, a point of coincidence for Latino from all over the globe. And it's been about building community. It's been about meeting new people, about collaborating with other artists. As a musician, also trying to learn from the different communities that I get in touch with in New York. And I started as a musician, and now I'm an educator too. I was a professor at the New School in New York, and I'm currently teaching at Harvard University, and also continuing performing with at least 5 of different projects that I have as an artist. So it's a pleasure to be here.
So glad to have you. And can you talk a little bit about We Have Iré?
We Have Iré. It's the best way that I always try to find out. It's a multidisciplinary play, and because it includes live performance by a live band on stage, and I was the composer of the music that you hear there. There's also dancers, and there's choreographer with several dancers. There's a DJ on the stage, and then there's the actors. So we all are telling the stories of basically Afro-Cuban artists in their pursuit of their artistic career, and they all immigrate, and is that journey of immigration coming into the United States. In the case of Paul Flores, he does reverse engineer because he travels back to Cuba to learn about his past and his family, but it's about finding yourself in a new place with all the challenges that it poses, and then at the same time forming community and becoming part of a larger community and larger project. So like any immigrant story, it doesn't come without challenges, and also it doesn't come with believing in yourself and understanding a larger sense of community and larger sense of identity as well, especially when you find yourself in a country where there are people from all over the world.
Well, thank you. And both, am I echoing? Okay. Well, both of these productions, Undocumented and We Have Iré, are just really beautiful, powerful pieces. Congratulations. So this is for everybody on the panel. For perhaps Jesús and Yosvany, you can speak about the pieces themselves or your other work, and Diana and David, definitely across your career and your other projects. I'm curious. So the Latinx theater has a long legacy of plays about the immigration experience, but do you view your production or your work, your productions, as part of this legacy or as a departure from the other work you've seen or encountered about immigration? Do you, on some level, are you part of a certain, trend or approach? Are you consciously subverting that? That's what I'm curious about.
And the question is for Jesús or myself?
Everybody.
Okay.
But yeah. Jesús, do you want to try that one?
Sure, I can start. Yeah. I mean, I think in thinking about Undocumented, when the show first started to sort of like emerge, and the show began as a series of 20 poems that I read in front of some friends at the Vortex Theater in Austin, and I was just kind of like, "Do you think this is a show?" And I wrote the piece, and I hate when people start stories with like after the election, but not long after the election of Donald Trump, like I think I was really keenly aware of the kind of ticking clock that is immigration policy in this country, right? Like everything we saw during the Trump administration was a magnification of all of the systems that were already in place. It was about like pulling the trigger on a thing that was already sort of architectured, right? And so I think there was a moment where I felt the kind of volatility of citizenship as a concept. And I was like, oh, like your status could change at any moment. Your personhood could change at any moment. So why leave behind a record that is only composed of birth certificates and past due notices and bills? Why not instead leave like a play behind, leave some poems behind? And so so in terms of thinking about like a tradition, I think a lot about the work of Vicky Grice, who's like a really like a mentor and like a soul teacher in a lot of ways for me. And in the same lineage, I think a lot about Lori Carlos, and I think a lot about Ntozake Shange and Sharon Bridgeforth and Omi Jones in thinking about solo performance and poetics as like the way that the show sort of happens and how it's constructed. In terms of a larger sort of history of teatro as it addresses migration, I think, you know, reading actos and reading a lot of the teatro campesino work early on, when I was an undergraduate student, I think it was one of the first moments that I saw policy explicitly named in a theatrical tradition, because like, you know, you can read Chekhov and that's cool. And I think if you know the dramaturgy behind like a Chekhov, then great, you understand the political circumstances of that moment. But what was lovely and powerful about Teatro Campesino's legacy specifically is the explicit naming of the thing, right? Like, this is the system that you are encountering. And so I think for me, in terms of how I think about Undocument in relation to these things, for me, Undocuments feels like my contribution to like a now and here of immigration policy. And specifically, I think the one challenge I really wanted to take on, and I don't know if the show does it, and I think that failure is maybe okay, but I think I really wanted to also think about complicity in the system. I became a naturalized citizen, and so much of that is due to circumstance, yes, but I also kept thinking while we were doing the show, I was like, damn, am I the villain? Like, am I the bad person in the show? And I say that because every time that I was excellent or excelled or became exemplary or exceptional, right? All of the things required to gain citizenship, I gave the US the contours to carve the very policies and metrics and rubrics that were then used to deport someone like my brother, who was seen as non-exceptional, who was seen as just a laborer, a pair of hands, a back. And so I think the idea of complicity is something that I really want to invite into my work as I keep writing and as I keep sort of working on this show specifically.
Oh. Yeah, does anyone want to respond to that? Or just share like your view? Yeah, go ahead.
Yeah, no, I do see. Well, I totally agree with everything that Jesus said, and because it's a similar journey that what we had, and especially from the beginning. I mean, not only we feel that we're coming out of the same legacy of the same theater legacy, the Chicano and Latinx theater legacy, and immigration, and especially because we wanted to portray the life and the life of an immigration, and a specific immigration from Cuba that is never talked about, and is the Afro-Cubans, the Afro-descendants from Cuba immigrating to the United States. Often when you talked about Cuban immigration, it just seemed black and white. It's like Miami Cubans and Cubans. And then there's the whole citizenship and interests of Afro-Cuban coming into this country, which then they identify themselves completely different, and also they gravitate toward more with the rest of the Caribbean, and also with the Black American, and is the type of immigration that nobody talks. So we realized that the four characters, which was it was based actually in the stories of Ramon Ramos Alayos, Lady DJ Lady, Paul Flores, and myself, and it was born like that. I mean, with a conversation with Paul and trying to figure out how we could talk about this side of the story that is never exposed, actually, and then to tell the story through their life, the experiences of their family, their journey, even like going from their provinces into Havana, and then from Havana finding ways to come into the U.S. and overcome all kinds of difficulties just to build a new community and to really to grow as an artist. And yes, and as I said before, I see that as a part of the legacy from the immigration story, and we were conscious about it. We were really deliberately about, yes, we want to talk about that. We want to let people know what the stories and the narratives of these characters, which at the same time they identify with any immigrants, because we immigrants share a lot of stories, no matter where you're coming from, no matter who you are, and no matter what how you think about yourself. So it was a couple of years in the making, because we have to travel to Cuba and travel to each person's provinces and municipalities and interview their families, interview neighbors, and then craft that story, bring it back to the U.S., and then with the help of Rosalba Rolón, start writing the story, Paul, and having everybody contributing to the narrative of the characters.
Yeah, thank you. David, I wonder. No, I love. By the way, Yosvany, how clear you were about like the intentionality, right? You were aware that you were sort of subverting or kind of lifting up something that isn't, seen enough or discussed enough or even known broadly. So that's great. David, I'm wondering, as a producer and in your kind of long form of running a company and telling multiple stories, how you think about this.
Sure. I think that that when we decided to produce Dreamers, a Bloodline in the year, began developing and writing and devising as a company in 2011, we were looking at season selections, and we were looking, and I had this sensation that I felt like I was looking at a lot of fictional and literary stories, and then I saw a documentary with a company member called Una Ruta Nada Santa, from San Salvador to the San Fernando Valley. And it was the story of three women and one woman carrying her baby from El Salvador to attempting to enter the United States. And I was speechless. And I asked myself, how could we be looking to simply produce fictions or literary tales that may not necessarily reflect the urgent realities that our community was facing at that moment. We had produced a handful of political plays, and the phenomenal organization North Texas Dream Team was a big supporter of our company, and we became friends with them. And so we used to go to parties together. They would come to our cast parties. And so when we saw this documentary, we felt it was important for us to attempt to tell a story about our own company members. Some of our own company members did not have the papers to live in the United States, or under legal terms, or however we want to describe that. We also have family members that did not have papers, co-workers and neighbors, and so we felt it was important to create a story that could reflect experiences of some of these people that we love. So that is how we began this journey, and what was incredible was like we were learning through the process of creating a play and the power of performing it. Audiences were also learning and experiencing similarly, and people that may not have could not even name an ancestor that came from another country, but we were seeing the impact of these stories, and I think what we were experiencing is that people were feeling seen on stage in Dallas in an original piece that was based on the experiences of the people that we knew. And one of the most moving experiences was when during a talk back after Dreamers of Bloodline, there was a family of about 15 people, and there was a matriarch of that family there. And one of the adults stood up and said, I want to recognize my mother, who's sitting here right next to me. She is the main character in the story, and I was that baby that she carried in her arms. And all of these children are the results of her journey. And that was a powerful experience. And yet at that time, even we were still just learning what it meant to tell this story and to talk about immigration policy. One of the other plays, the next play that we produced was Deferred Action. And what's interesting about what Jesús was saying is the concept of complicity, because that play was really exploring the and challenging complicity. It was the story of documented activists that were frustrated during an election year with a Democratic candidate for president that was unwilling to talk about full immigration reform. In fact, it was a Latina candidate that these activists were supporting, and she did not want to talk about supporting a full immigration reform for 14 million people. And so one of the characters was really calling her out for that. And through the course of the play, a Republican candidate decides to meet that activist and create a platform that is entirely a far-right platform, yet for full reform for 14 million immigrants. And that created a conundrum of, does this activist support that candidate for that issue, or does the or does he support the candidate, the Democratic candidate that is not committing entirely to full reform? So that became the conundrum, and it was, and I think what we were challenging was looking at these politics in black and white terms. Because they're so complicated, and what does it mean that only some people have reap benefits when others don't? It's a really difficult situation, and each character had a different response to that. So it opened up a lot of conversations, and it educated quite a lot of people, and it really that was an amazing experience to see, and I think that's what I think the power of theater can do, is that it not only allows story of people to be seen, but allows us to really dig into these very challenging political issues, but also these human, ethical, and moral issues.
That's great. Thank you. I noticed that Paul Flores, who wrote We Have Iré, commented about, wanting the work to educate actually about immigration. Is that in your mind at the forefront of the story? Do you think of that as mission, or is that yeah? Go ahead, Diana.
I just wanted to I do accept that what we were talking about. I don't think I've ever seen anything close to my immigrant story on stage. Do you know what I mean? I don't think I've seen anywhere near the sort of, like Paul Flores was saying, the nuance, the scope, the conservative, Republican, the very liberal, the communist. I mean, there's so much scope in the immigrant story that I become really, I become hungry for more nuance. That's definitely true. Especially, I mean, for me, especially, and something that I long to see on stage is the loneliness of what it is to be an immigrant person, lost from community, and plopped into circumstances where there are no, there is nothing holding you up, right? Like I'm only speaking for myself, but I come from, my family was very much alone here. We didn't speak English. I always say, thank God for Sesame Street, because I think that's the only way I learned. But I really have no connection. I had no connection really until I moved to Hollywood and started working, because we didn't live in a community like that, and so I just feel this sense of loneliness, intense and incredible loneliness in the immigrant story that I'm not sure I've seen addressed, and I would really like to. I know I touch on those subjects in what I write, but that is for me the depth of my immigrant story, is loneliness and disconnection.
So I wonder, Diana, you don't always write, or do you? Is that feeling of being an immigrant, a displaced person, in your work, whether or not it's about immigration in quotes?
I would have to say always. I mean, I always interrogate that idea, especially because I mostly write about women like me, because that's the subject I know the best about, and also something that I don't often see portrayed. And it is always informs how I look at the world, how I write, my closeness to the way my family unit works. I think it permeates everything, even no matter what I'm writing. Yeah, it's true.
Jesús, what about you? And Yosvany, I'm curious. I mean, in general, like, so these pieces happen to be about, very personal immigration stories, right? And very personal. Do you envision? Are you working on other work in which that is not front and center? You were called to tell these stories in this moment. Do you think you'll stay on that trajectory?
Yeah. I mean, I think with Undocuments, that I actually often sort of find myself wrestling with the phrase "happen to be," because I, in some ways, for as much as citizenship is arbitrary and we are all in many ways sort of like accidents of birth circumstances. It's hard not to think about like how keenly this was all designed for us, right? Like by design, like this river ends up splitting these countries, ends up generating like the need for paperwork, ends up generating like who gets to be a person who doesn't. And so I think Undocuments, was very specifically and pointedly like a way to think about my relationship to documentation and policy explicitly. And it wasn't even to like, honestly, I don't think there was anything noble in it. Like, I actually think I think it's a deeply selfish work. And I'm really invested in that selfishness. And I think to echo some of what Diana was saying, it's a solo show, and it isn't because I perform it by myself, yes, but I'm also echoing and co-performing with my parents and my family who are characters in the show. And I think so much of the selfishness comes from that really deep desire to speak the thing that is killing us, right? That is killing us slowly and fast. Because at talkbacks, I always find myself, connecting with people who are either directly from like the El Paso Juarez frontera, or who are coming into the theater with migrant stories or from mixed status families. And the thing I keep returning to is like the contract we sign with the immigration system in the US is a contract of silence, right? It's a contract of silence and isolation. And in exchange for your stay, you get to shut up and never talk to anyone about what's hurting you. And I think for me, there is like in Undocuments, like a deeply selfish need to speak and to be true with people who share that need to speak as well. And in terms of like, where my work is moving now, I think the plays I'm writing now, I mean, a lot, two of them have definitely like a kind of center on immigration as a theme. but I think I am more interested in. So to give you just a small like thing, I'm writing a piece about like the Kukui, and like La Llorona, El Chupacabra, like all of these sort of like scary stories. But as a way to maybe like reject the idea of like the need to humanize, because I think like to some degree I am at a point, and I think about like Yosvany Reyes, who's also like who've sort of like seen like the decade plus work that a lot of activists have put forth, and it's like, if y'all don't see us as human at this point, like you don't want to, so then like let me be terrifying, actually, like let me be the thing you're scared of then. And so I think I migration, I think, is always going to haunt my work, and I want to invite other ways of being in that space and having that conversation that does not immediately resort to like palatable affects, or like things that people can sit comfortably with and like leave the theater with and be like, oh, that was sad. Yeah.
Yeah. I think, well, I agree with Diana. I mean, I want to touch on in some points that she mentioned. It's like the solitude that we immigrants face at the beginning or along the way. I think it's something that is inescapable, because basically you just find yourself in a place that there's no points of reference. You don't know anybody, and you have to survive and overcome any difficulties and challenges that society poses to you. In my case, coming from a family that is actually immigrant family in Cuba, because my family comes from my mother's side from Haiti, and from my father's side from Jamaica and from Spain, it's a double immigration thing that I carry with me, and perhaps the fact that they were immigrants, and they always, I was aware of immigration since I was born, pushed me and pushed also my brothers and both my parents to reinvent yourself in this new place, and also to find ways to create a new community that's going to become your family, basically. And that has been the story of one of my story, but also it's the story of some of the characters on We Have Iré, and is them finding themselves in this other place that they really longing so much to come, but at the same time just to realize that, oh, we are alone here. How now we have to figure it out. What is the next step to basically to understand again or to redefine what citizenship means, and citizenship in a new place, not citizenship of like, oh, I'm Cuban. No, you're not Cuban anymore. Now you're something else. You're becoming a citizen of the world, if you will. So that is part of the piece, and to see the journey of each character with the complex relationship, also in terms of like politics, in terms of like the mythology, religions, and things that they left behind, that that they don't, these are no themes that are often talked. And also using all of these, I would say, using all of these imaginaries that they bring from their culture to then understand where we are, which is something that we don't talk about. It's like, how do we understand the new place where we are now? It's like, do we have the words that explain this new world? Do we have the character that we grew up with that can just like, explain things? No, we don't. And we have to basically create it ourselves. So, I mean, and that's what I was trying to say, that there's a lot of connection with what Diana was talking, and also Jesús. And then in terms of the second question, with regard to if immigration is like, would be part of my new project, or is something that I feel that I have to do again. I'm working on a new project, which is an opera that without realizing it, yes, the theme of immigration is there from a whole different perspective, because it's like, is the immigration represented by my ancestor that arrived there from different places, but also them fighting to become citizens there, and then finding to embrace this new place with a national feeling, inspired by revolutions, from the Haitian Revolution, the French Revolution, and at the center of it is also social justice. One of the character, Aponte, who was a free man a free man of color, who organized the first rebellion against the colonial system. So yes, even though I didn't purposefully thought about, okay, is immigration going to be part of it? Because we don't think like that way. We're just like, we're made out of so many different stories that they just start coming out at the moment that we need them. And yes, it's in a way it is. It's part of the piece too, without, consciously thinking that, how can I address again immigration in its subject?
Now I was thinking of kind of, as an audience member, this notion of just being called or compelled to tell a story, or to be selfish and tell the story. That selfish act resulted in what is, I think, a really profound piece, Jesus. So thank you. Let's take a look at this. The title of this, Reframing. I'm just curious, what does that mean, and what are we reframing? Is there a need, and for whom?
I think it's a really important question, because I'm listening to the conversation, and I hear a lot of incredible ways of approaching the work that are demonstrate the evolution of how we think about these stories, which I think is the work of the artist and the work of a theater artist. I was struck by the Jesus's work about, rather than humanizing, demonizing. If I'm saying that correctly, but is that what you would say? Like creating a monster, if you don't see me as a human now, I'll project myself as a monster.
Like I think it's that idea of projection, of barbing yourself, right? It's like, okay, cool, like I've made myself as soft and as palatable as I can be for you to have me, and you still don't want me here. So let me be as large and monstrous as you think I am then.
I think, I just wanted to quickly jump in, and also, for my characters, let the women be unlikable, let them be kind of awful sometimes, and let them exist in that way too, which is something that I don't, sometimes we don't see as often either. Like you say, Jesus, let us be monstrous as well, tell those different stories.
And so it raises a question too. I wonder, because I'm also curious about humanizing those who we frequently demonize, or have traditionally demonized in our immigration stories within our genre, because I think a lot of the people that are demonized in our stories are often also demonized in this divisive media hailstorm, because I'm really curious about what it means to truly have a conversation, truly engage with people that think very different than ourselves. And for one, being in a family with people whose political views have prevented us from speaking for several months at a time, but then coming to the conclusion that their family, it's I was born in the same home as my brothers and sisters, and I don't want to lose that. It's a really challenging scenario to be in a family with someone who has political views that could harm people that I love, my chosen family. and so I'm curious about also kind of seeing what means the, and maybe humanize is a simplistic term, but to understand, to imagine that story, to imagine those stories, and possibly imagine redemption. I think that when we think about our progressive politics, our politics, are ones in which we do see redemption. We would not have the abolition movement without considering redemption as as a potential end. Because with abolition, no one is discarded. Everyone has an opportunity. So I'm curious in seeing how our progressive politics actually creates space for those who we may view as completely opposite of progressive. I'm a little bit in that space right now in terms of looking at our work.
Yeah, I'll keep that question going though. And on some level, like what's needed, right? What isn't being conveyed? I'm hearing nuance, more specificity toward universality. I'm kind of hearing that from you, Diana. But in general, I feel like we need more stories. But yeah, what is missing?
Well, I mean, I suppose what's missing is, golly, so much of it. I mean, so much of it is just listening to all the different stories and all the and understanding. I mean, we say it all the time, right? I mean, I'm sure all of us that come out of our mouth is, we're not a monolith. We're not a monolith. I don't know how many times you have to say it to non-Latino people that, yes, we have a lot, we have certain things in common, but we also have a lot of things that are not in common. For example, just what I crave to see are things that I see in my own life. Like I write a lot about my neurodiversity. I write a lot about, I was a really bad kid. I was a big troublemaker. I want to see stories. I like messy stories as well. And I was an actor for a really long time, and I played so many like women with a heart of gold, and so many stereotypes. And so I think we were going to talk about this later, but it's also like, who's the gaze? Who's looking at our stories, right? I'm not terribly interested in writing for like the white gaze, except that if they want to come look, I'm happy to open the world to them. I'm not about to translate my Spanish. I'm not about to make it easier on them. And I like to really challenge ideas, because the truth is nobody's ever asked me. I walk in a white world. I walk in primarily white institutions, but people seem to be very comfortable with talking and saying things to me without ever like investigating the depths of it. And I'd really like to answer a lot of things that would make a lot of people uncomfortable. I think a lot more discomfort in this topic would be because they think they know what the story is, I think, and they don't. They don't know. They don't even know what questions to ask if you're an immigrant.
I think yeah, I want to sort of pick up on some of the, I've been working through some of like what you offered, David, and I'm thinking about like in terms of like stories that's missing, right? Like I think to kind of echo back on what you touched on, Diana, about like some of the characters not being likable, like writing women who are unlikable, right? Like sort of being like, yeah, like this is a part of that human fullness. And I'm thinking about like that idea of like the redemptive, and I don't know, I think when I think about the work of like who is sort of left out of stories, right? I think I sometimes I actually like am explicitly and deliberately never thinking about like, like, oh, like what about like, like my Republican cousin who works for Border Patrol, which I think is like the story in a lot of Latino families, right? Especially along the border, because that's who's working CBP. I'm always like, let's go the other way, right? Like a proximity to power is already giving that person the stories that they want. Like they've already sort of chosen, like, oh, this is actually like where the nearness that I want. I'm thinking about like the other end of that, right? Like I'm thinking about like, my brother who is like, I would say like, one of the main characters of Undocuments is a drunk who's like super homophobic, bullied me for most of my childhood, is I would say a misogynist in some ways, like I just like and by virtue of being a laborer, right, like all of those things get magnified as the only thing he is. And for me, really, like the question is, how do we get at those identities and traits that most often get I'm looking at the most vulnerable point of entry, right? Like not the person who has proximity or wants power, but the person who actually like is in all of their fullness, almost always left in a kind of powerlessness. So like I'm thinking about the fact that like, like I think about how many addicts like I have in my blood and my chosen family, and how little theater there is that sort of like talks about and deals with addiction in a way that is that gives any kind of redemption at all, right? I'm thinking about like all of the laboring people that so often get sort of pushed aside, right? Like I would like to see more complexity for them, and a lot for this last bit. Like I think I've also had such a difficult time sometimes, and I understand it, and also like I always want to push back a little whenever people start talking about like, or they sort of get on discussions of representation. One of the first figures that always gets invoked is the maid, right? Like we're tiring of seeing ourselves as maids, and then the list of stereotypes sort of continues from there. And I think, right, like what does the really complex maid play look like, right? Like my mom has been cleaning homes in the US since she was 12. She's still doing that today, and she's 63. And all of the worlds that have been invited into our home because of that labor are messy and funny and complicated. And I'm like, yeah, like I actually like I do want to see like a maid play, because I want to like I want to see that world, right? The better for me, like a better question or a sharper question is like, where is the fullness of that representation, and how do we use that representation to rehearse the world we want, not just as like a check mark, as people program seasons. I don't know, that's kind of jumbled, but it's a thing I'm thinking about.
I love that. Rehearse the world we want. I'll be stealing that. Credit given. Yeah. I'm thinking about again, back to the title of this panel, and in immigration, the difference between like immigration to me is starting more and more to sound like, wait, no, that's policy, that's system, that's talking point, right? That's political weapon or prop. But much of our conversation has really been about immigrants and being an immigrant, and those specific journeys and nuances again. And I'm wondering if that's, I'm sure we need plays about the political and or systemic subject of immigration, but really what we need is just hundreds and hundreds of nuanced plays about immigrants, which is where we might start to cross over into, again, universality and real understanding from folks that aren't specifically Latinx, maybe. So here's a question. I mean, what is it that theater can do uniquely, maybe that other art forms can't, specifically regarding what we've been talking about? Or can theater do anything unique?
If I can sort of start this off, and I want to shout out actually Caramia, one of the yeah, one of the best things that happened to me was it 2019? My time is all, I don't know when anything happened. But the production of Your Healing is Killing Me that happened with Florinda Bryant the first time at Academia. If you've read Your Healing is Killing Me, you sort of like know the idea that like this is, it's a manifesto, not a play. It is about the act of collective self-defense. And I loved when I first read it, and then I went and watched it. And when I went and watched it, one of the first things I realized, and as I've been following Vicky and her work with Academia, and I've been thinking about like the ethic of togetherness, right? Like that one of the things that theater does really well, and why it is so important, is that at a very basic level, like just with an organizer brain on, you have access to a bunch of people all at once, which means that like whenever you talk about a community, like, oh, you can make one right here, right? Like what would it look like if we had a day where we're like, cool, hey, today, if you want to get and see the show, like, bring a pallet of water, bring like some canned food, right? Like, sign this petition. I'm thinking so much about the opportunity for that togetherness and that liveness as an actual intervention for the change that so many of our shows talk about. And I think watching that happen during Your Healing is Killing Me, for me, was really, really formative, because I kept thinking about how the sort of inherent theatricality of so many of the direct actions that were performed by a lot of migrant activists, especially like in Tucson, where like and Phoenix, where like they were like stopping buses with their bodies. And I think, yeah, there's something about liveness and the act of congregation in a theater that at base level provides like collective power, right? It provides people then and there. And I think for me that is for me like a really potent spark for like how is theater important to these issues is yeah, like you have community revealing itself in very explicit ways. Like the bodies are there, the breath is there. Hopefully the story that's been told is inspiring the spirit to be willing as well.
I want to talk just a little bit about something I want the theater to do that I think it is really capable of, is to free the natural voice of Latinx, Latino people, and let them just exist with our own voices. I mean, I spent a lot of time having my accent flattened, my vowels fixed, my lisp worked on, and I'm so passionate about just letting our accents exist the way they exist and having people hear them. I mean, I do a lot of acting teaching, and so I have my Latinx kids have these very, not all of them, of course, I'm not trying to stereotype, but there are small voices and it's all very quiet, and it's really hard to pull that sound out because it's a community that's been used to being silenced in so many ways. Like if it's not the fact that we have this accent that maybe is not as whatever as another one, or that we speak bilingually and you can't understand us and that is somehow offensive. I mean, so the voices get shut off. And I think one thing that at least I think if we decolonize like theater studies and places where our students go, is to allow them to use the natural voice and just put it into the blend of what is quote unquote acceptable in the theater, Like, why can't Hamlet sounds like he comes from East LA, and just let that be what it is. That's something I'm super passionate about. And I think that's something that the theater is especially apt for.
Well, I think that there is no immigration or immigrant story that is not involved with politics. And I mean, it's like you are, whether you like it or not, you're a politician. And I mean, I can talk as a composer and as a performer, a musician, and some, which is not different than theater. And I really like to use the stage at this unique moment in which I have to talk to your audience, which becomes your congregation or becomes your community or becomes your followers and the people that you can actually tell what you think about the world and what you think about, what art is and, where you come from. and what the world looks like, and what the world you would like, and what the world should have looked like that we haven't seen yet. So I like to, and it's something that I cannot separate from. I'm a political person, and so it's like it's something that I enjoy doing too. But it's actually in that pursue that we can really explain our complexity. We can explain that yes, we're religious, but we are spiritual. We have a spirituality too, which is something that we don't see here a lot. There's a lot of religious here, but there's not spirituality. Something that I always saw, but we can't say that we have a different mythology. Yeah, we can't say that we come from a different place. We have a different idea of the origins of the human beings, and is that complexity that what really makes a difference? It's like, and we try to find ways to talk about it from different perspectives. But I mean, what we do on the stage is the only way that we can get people. We can convert people into like, okay, yes, I got it wrong all the time. Yes, you're not what I thought you were, and yes, you are as complex as any human being, because it's like life. I mean, any human being is complex, and oftentimes, the immigrants is the person that is the other. So it's like how we stop being the other, and we're just we are who we are, and we don't have to explain ourselves, and we don't have to tell people where we come from and how, why we think the way we think. So these are the things that I like to see, and these are the same, play or musicians or artists that I follow, the one that are trying to push those boundaries that basically keeps us separate rather than, unite us in a way.
I think those are really interesting points, Yosvany. I think it's interesting to think that that we're not going to convert audience members, and maybe we don't want to. I think that reframing, immigration, we can say, I keep thinking about resignifying narrative. I think we need to create more narratives. We need to create more stories and proliferate our own stories as we create them. And I've been thinking a lot about resignifying narratives, and really, and I think that where I am, because when I look at a lot of our work around immigration, I also think that we're wrestling with the problem of power, and I think that and I think for me, who was born in the United States, I think often the stories of immigration are speaking to me about the ways in which I have to contend and face power in some form, and I think that, and I have to say, I think at this moment in my life as an activist, as well as an artist, and as well as a producer, I feel that I'm compelled to ask myself how to become intimate with that which I hate, and what does it mean to be close to that, because maybe that which I hate isn't so solid and fixed. Maybe it's as flexible and desirous of change as I am. And so I think and so I think when we're looking at this, I think the complexity of the world we live in, I think is clear. It's much more complex than I've believed it to be. And I think that, and I'm thinking, and I'm hearing that our theater is eager to move in towards these complexities and seeing these kinds of new possibilities. And that's what I'm hearing is that's how we're using theater to reframe many of the issues that we're writing about, or we're performing about.
Love that. And what was the word you used instead of reframing? What was it?
Resignifying, essentially using the same, even narratives that we may be opposed to, because just by speaking the narratives of, say, the other side, I think we can recalibrate that narrative. I think I'm challenging myself to see how our narratives aren't fixed, and that there's space with them to move and re-signify their meaning based on our intention and discovery. And then what does it mean to be in conversation with unexpected audiences, or maybe even audiences that aren't even there. I in the audience experiencing our stories. I just and I think this becomes a feeling from feeling so trapped by power, to be quite honest, is that what would it mean if I abandon the dichotomy of this polar relationship of me versus power, and is there another way to enter that relationship? And I'm not saying that will necessarily solve anything. I'm just curious what that means to step into that a different relationship than an us versus them dynamic.
All right, let's see. We have a question from Daniel Jaquez. Is immigration the problem, or is it the toxic patriotism? Interesting.
Nations are the problem, I would say. Like I would argue, like, yeah, the idea of country is the problem. During the process of making documents happen, I Rudy was sort of talking. Rudy Ramirez, who's the director, was talking me through like the sequence that happens leading up to the naturalization ceremony. And one of the things that we sort of, came to, were thinking about was the way that that we so often work really hard to be liked by countries, and work really hard in the service of of forcing ourselves to like countries, and countries by their very nature are invented enterprises in the service of making wealth for whoever has the most power in that nation, right? So it's difficult to sort of be here, and there are times where I meet people who are really like, Viva Mexico, arriba, way. And I'm like, that's great. And also I personally thinking about my family, trajectory, we left that country because that country didn't want us either, right? The people who have the most power in that country were starving us. They were neglecting us. The police were working to actively cover up the murders of thousands of women in that desert city, and they continue to do so. A country is a thing built in the service of gaining wealth for the people with power there. So for me, yeah, as to restate Daniel's question, immigration isn't the problem. Immigration is the natural pattern that we have always known as creatures of mobility, right? As creatures who sort of move and migrate with seasons, and long to be elsewhere all the time. And it's the moment that something becomes a country, a thing with borders, a thing that demands citizenship, that the problems begin. I think so much often about how whenever I say I miss Mexico, what I'm actually saying is I miss the land that is now known as Mexico. I miss the mountains that are there, and I miss that particular desert, and I miss all of the people that I love there. But do I miss Mexico as a nation? No, I actually wish countries didn't exist. I wish movement was as free as birds and other migratory animals show us that it can be and should be. So yeah, I would say the problem is the nation and its concept.
It's really powerful, deep question, and I'm going to check out this in the chat here. So Elisa says, when I think of immigration, I often feel into the Brazilian Portuguese word. Who can pronounce it?
Saudade.
Saudade. Thank you. That particular feeling of melancholic love and longing. Do any of you, let's see, resonate with the concept of saudade? And would you like to riff on that feeling? So that feeling of melancholic love and longing.
No, I think. Go ahead, Diana.
No, you go ahead.
No, I was gonna say I think it's more complex than that because yes, melancholy and saudade is I think it's just one layer of many things that we can we can remember, or would like to be in touch with. But it's interesting at the same time that, I mean, as I always thought, and Jesus was saying that, yeah, I mean, immigration is a natural thing too. So part of the immigration process is also to find a new place, and to find yourself with a new community, because otherwise you're never going to be happy where you are. Or happy is not the word. You're never going to feel right in the right place. And even birds, when they go when they go into different places, they don't go to the warmer climates to think about what they left in the north. They just go and embrace that place that they are. And I look at immigration more like that. It's like, we're here. But as I said to everybody, I always said, I like, I'm a person that I like to travel and I like to move around the world. And I like to be in a place where there is like creativity. And, in all years and before, to be in the Mecca was like the place that you want to be as an artist, because there was so much happening. And yes, I'm in New York now, but I could be in Burundi. I could be whatever that creativity is ebullient. So I would think like it's a little bit more complex and it's more dynamic, because it often happens that even when you find yourself in a new place, this gives you now opportunity to dig deeper to some of the stuff that you're really interested in, and to really go and research more of subjects that you really want to deepen. So just to respond to the question, I think that this is just a little part, but it's more of a complex it's more of a complex subject. And I know, I mean, I'm not trying to say that it will, that you're seeing it as a reductionist way, but I will invite you just to think about how naturally the animals immigrate, and they don't look back. They just go there, and and they keep moving around the world, like it's like in the same way that all of the fish in the ocean, they almost go around the globe, following the currents, and finding themselves in different places.
And just to riff a little bit off that, Yosvany, is I mean, I have a longing to go places I've never been. That's my deep longing. I don't feel a need to stay. I don't like staying in one place for very long. I want to see things I don't know. I have a huge curiosity. It's always interested me that so many people, especially in this country, or I suppose all over the place, but they don't leave. They don't go further than 50 miles away from where they were born. And that is interesting to me, because that's a completely different experience from what I have. That's my longing. My longing is to go someplace else.
Yeah, what a reversal that being an immigrant becomes stigmatized and demonized, but when it could just as easily be a position of honor because of sort of someone who's brave and goes on a quest, and begins again. so it's just I'm kind of reflecting back on this, the toxic patriotism question, and I go, well, gosh, I can't say, oh, it is patriotism. What it brings to mind is that in one of the ways to maintain power is to identify an other, right, as a threat, right, and then associate yourself with that which can protect from the threat. And so we've seen that play out. And so if I was to identify the core issue, is that it's just immigration across generations, immigrants across generations are so useful to a corrupt maintaining of power. And this notion of longing, I think it's why so many of the stories about immigrants I find really moving and kind of resonant and sad, only in that melancholic way, is that and kind of, I also love your point of view, Yosvany and Diana, about like, moving on and not looking back like the birds. But there's something in us as humans where I think we long for something that doesn't exist anymore, right? And we associate it with a place. But as soon as you leave it, or your people leave it, or your family members leave, that thing you're longing for doesn't really exist. And I do think that makes for some complex storytelling, which is why we're often called to tell these stories. I love it. Yes, I love you're speaking of birds and metaphors here. Absolutely. There's been some good stuff in this today. So what else? What else is on this group's mind? We promised 90 minutes, folks. Oh, we got more. Diana, can you please say more on your thoughts of how to uplift Latinx voices, particularly those that might sound quiet when asked to speak in a high school classroom, asking as a working teaching artist?
Thank you for asking about that. Yes, it is. I mean, the first thing we need to know is that a lot of the times that comes from trauma. So I think as a teacher, as a facilitator, you're going to have to be very mindful that you're not adding to the trauma by saying "speak up," or by it's a delicate balance of freeing their voices, right? Freeing their natural voice and giving them the opportunity to speak. I mean, how do you do it? You work with them, you find material that they resonate with. There's a lot of fantastic new play. I mean, look at the writers we have in this room. If you go on the New Play Exchange, you'll find Latinx, Latine writers of all kinds, and there's a lot of stories. I think find things that resonate with them. Find the writers that are writing for them and their stories. Especially, I mean, if you're a teacher and you have a whole class full of immigrant kids, then I think it's incumbent upon you to find work for them, not just recycle, Enemy of the People and say, hey, let's do that. That's part of the whole. One of the biggest things I think is that we do want our own stories told. That's kind of why I always talk about like a takeover of what the theater is. Like I'm not interested in a pyramid. I'm interested in this. I always talk about like specificity of story means I'm listening to a story about a Cambodian man who was imprisoned and tortured by the Cambodian government, and then he's an immigrant, moves to America, and his daughter finds out later that he was in a rock band, right? A Laurenese Cambodian rock band. To me, that was a story of connection for me as an immigrant. I have more in common with that story than I have with a lot of other things that I see in the theater. But that has nothing to do with me, really, right? I'm Colombiana. There's just a lot of differences, but I mean, those connections, that's what I'm excited to see. So if you have a very specific story that is, maybe we've never seen it before. I'm not that interested in like seeing what your version of Death of a Salesman is. I'm interested in seeing your unique story, just like Cambodian rock band. And I'll come see it no matter who you are, if it's so specific that it's going to just give me something new to look at. And I don't think like Cambodian rock band is not written for my gaze particularly, is it? But nevertheless, it opens up a world to me that I'm so excited to be in. And I think that's what, especially as educators, that we need to open up that world to our students, and so that they can see these stories and how they connect to them, and their voices will free up once they feel like they're being seen.
I can just briefly tag in on that. So I was a high school teacher for 9.5 years, and one thing, I think when it comes to including sort of these different types of stories that open up new doors and rooms, I also think a lot too about how often we sort of use the phrase voice to really specificate locating speaking. But I'm thinking about other ways that that idea of voice can be sort of brought in or invited into the classroom, right? I think so much about the students who are really quiet and have a ton to say, and they're saying it through the music they compose or write, or through the illustrations they make, or the marginalia that you find on papers and tests that sometimes you're this is stunning, this is really beautiful work, or the writing they produce. And so I think too about what does it mean to also think about, which I think is also a good question to ask, right, of theater too, and then theater remake, what does it mean to invite different registers of voice into the making space, right? That sometimes the voice is found in a piece of music, or in the line break of a poem on the page. And so I also think a lot about how do we think about polyvocality in the classroom too.
I'm thinking about how theater is more, in essence, you can make it happen faster than other performance mediums. I mean, music too, but specific to that question about what can theater uniquely do that, say, film and television can't and isn't, it's that sentence you just said about what could we do to redefine that word, and how to bring more, what did you say? What was the phrase?
Polyvocality.
Polyvocality, right? We could make that happen faster, perhaps, in the arts right now, nonprofit arts, for sure. All right, so we have just a few minutes left. What's on your mind? 90 minutes into a conversation. What are you taking away? Panel. It's been really great to meet you all and be in this space. That's for sure.
Well, I'm thinking a lot about the tools that we have. I'm thinking about Your Healing is Killing Me, which is the structure of that production is so powerful, because you realize at the end of the piece that the performer has bringing you to get us together as a community, and that is how we are going to heal ourselves, and protect ourselves. So theater as organizing, theater as community building, but still community. I mean, theater in its ancient ways, I think, is still effective, and I think that's also, I think, where Academia is at as well, is that we're still exploring mask performance, physical theater, performing outdoors, and what does it mean to experience joy and to create stories that may not be based in language, that may not be based in a text, but that are telling stories in these multimedia forms, these historical multimedia forms, not necessarily digital. And so, and then the ever evolving frame of reference, changing the context in which, and the frame in which we see these stories in this work. I walk away with just a lot of ideas and possibilities about what we're doing. I'm just really thankful for all of the feedback of everyone on the panel and what they've shared.
Definitely, thank you. Yosvany had to leave and sends his best to everybody for joining today. So I'm wondering, yeah, Jesús, Diana, what's a small takeaway from today?
I love hanging out with all of you. I think it's been a really interesting afternoon, and I feel like I have so much to think about, and so much to write about, and so much to take to my other students. You know, I just want to leave people with just what I said earlier. Ask questions about if you discover. I mean, if you discover somebody's an immigrant, maybe just talk to them a little bit about it. About everybody's immigration story is incredibly different, and I think just having that out into the world as something that you ask about, you don't know. I'd love to talk to you about it. I promise you, nobody's asked me, except now that I'm on the panel. Nobody's ever asked me about it, so it's really been quite nice to be able to just riff on it a little bit.
What about you, Jesús?
Yeah, I think a sort of takeaway that I'm leaving with today is continuing to think about, right, like what does it mean to reframe and to re-signify. And I'm thinking about, you know, how located and seen I felt in hearing Diana, you talking about isolation and silence, and in hearing Yosvany sort of talk about and focus on like the inevitability of the politic, right? That like the political is actually always inherently present, because like I am here because of a set of laws, and so much of my life has been choreographed by legislature, and that's inherently always part of the story. So, and I think like a last sort of thing I'm thinking about too is just like, yeah, I am often asked, you know, if you could go back and like, you know, give advice to your like 9-year-old self or 7-year-old self, like what would you say? And I've been thinking a lot lately about what it means to be like a sort of like time traveling coyote to myself. Like what does it mean to actually go back to those small versions of myself and smuggle them into the present? Because I think they were a lot more courageous and brave than I am sometimes as I get older. And so, yeah, I wonder in what other capacities we can be the best kinds of coyotes to each other. How do we smuggle each other's work and words and hopes into our spaces? How do we carry each other into the every room we walk in? I hope that's the sort of migratory spirit that we continue to move along in.
Migratory spirit. I love that. Thank you, Jesús. Thank you, David. Thank you, Diana. Thanks to our interpreters today. Thanks to Yosvany. Congrats again, Jesús, on your performance, your show. I want to remind everybody about the 6 p.m. Screening presentation of Canción para un Niño. Oh my God, I lost the name there, Edigo. So check that out. And again, things are streaming after they premiere. So folks, spread the word about these conversations and these productions. Good night, everyone. Thanks again. Bye.